Well, welcome everyone to Westcliff University's Distinguished Innovator Speaker Series. And our first speaker of the spring series, Ben Hafele. He's Managing Director of the Lean Startup Company. Ben is a seasoned professional who's worked with more than 450 startup innovation and product development teams spanning 5 continents. What he's brought to these teams is a radical approach to the entrepreneurial process. It's called the Lean Startup Framework. The Lean Startup Framework involves a continuous innovation cycle that can create radically successful businesses. So forget what you've been taught about MVPs, minimum viable products. These concepts that he's going to deliver over the next hour will simplify the process and get your product to market and or your business to revenue in significantly less time with less work. A lot of this, actually all of it, comes from the Lean Startup by Eric Ries. Eric Ries is the founder of the Lean Startup Company, and Ben is the executive director. This is a book that you really should get, especially if you're an MBA student. This is an unbelievable insight into a new way of working. I'm Dr. Barry Sandrew, Director of Entrepreneurship at Westcliff, and your moderator today. I'm really happy you were all able to join us this morning. And we'll get to Ben in just a minute. But first, I want to briefly introduce Westcliff University to those in the webinar audience who might not be familiar with the institution. Pictured here is our campus in Irvine, California. Westcliff is an accredited private institution of higher learning with over 6,000 students enrolled both live, online, and on campus. There are 4 colleges at Westcliff: the College of Business, College of Education, College of Law, and the College of Technology and Engineering. We also offer a full stack coding bootcamp certificate and a cybersecurity bootcamp certificate. To learn more about Westcliff, including our awesome undergraduate athletic program, I invite you to visit our website at westcliff.edu, as well as Westcliff University on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So now here's Ben. Ben, Managing Director of Lean Startup Company. He leads training, coaching, and consulting engagements with startups, large corporations, and government agencies. What he's brought to those teams is a radical approach to the entrepreneurial process, the Lean Startup Framework, a continuous innovation cycle that can create radically successful businesses. Ben, welcome. This is great.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And so, just to give everyone maybe a little bit more context on how I kind of came to be at, Lean Startup Co. Back in 2011, I'd already done a large number of kind of, coaching and training engagements with startups. And I was also working on product development teams at Caterpillar, big yellow construction equipment, at the time. And I was teaching entrepreneurship at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois. And, with the kind of the summation of all that experience, I could say that the way that we as the human race did entrepreneurship, it wasn't really working too well. And even what I was teaching at Bradley University was, okay, have a big plan, right? Make a thick business plan with a lot of market analysis and a glorious spreadsheet, right? That has a big hockey stick growth curve, and then, go and present that to people and convince them that that's exactly what's going to happen. And then with maybe, a bright smile and some polished PowerPoint slides, you'll get some funding. And then your job is to go and execute that thing that you wrote down in that really, 100-page document. That didn't work too well. And we kind of knew that it didn't work too well. But we really weren't aware of any other way of doing it. And it's basically because we were treating, a startup, right? A new initiative, that's full of uncertainty. Exactly the way we were treating a big established business. Again, we didn't know any better, right? I certainly didn't know any better. I was teaching at a university the wrong thing to do. And then this article came across my desk that was called The Lean Startup. And then I read the book. And for me, it was an epiphany, because it solved so many challenges that I'd been facing in coaching startup teams, product development teams, innovation teams at larger organizations as well. And so ever since then, that the 450 or whatever it is now, that's all, those are all attempts by me to just get reps, right? And professionally, my job is to prevent anyone from having to go through the learning curve that I went through. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. I've been called into the legal and brand office, and because I was red flagged, I've been, I've run into to brick walls in terms of running experiments that weren't designed the right way. And so everything that I do now is basically saving everyone from that excruciatingly hard learning curve that I went on. So I wanted to maybe start things off with an exercise because I'm going to talk about lean startup today. But you might have noticed earlier, right, when Barry was talking about where I've worked. Sure, I coach startups as traditionally defined, but I also do a lot of work at big companies, right? Fortune 100 companies, government agencies. And you might be asking yourself, why, that's not a startup. So what is lean startup? Why are we applying it there? So a little bit of a thought exercise for you here. So just bear with me. We're gonna, for any former, like Looney Tune fans out there, we're gonna be talking about Acme Corp, right? This is the manufacturer of all of Wile E. Coyote's contraptions that he tries to, catch the Roadrunner with, of course. So, at Acme Corp, we have our annual budget meeting. Okay. So imagine that we're all there and we've got the board of directors, we've got the CEO, and the C-suite, and we've had a excruciating 3 to 4 month process of saying, what are we going to allocate money to? And we're down to 2 teams. We've got team A and team B. And so team A gets up and they say, we're the widget division. We've been in business for 25 years. Last year our revenue was 4.5 billion. Next year it's projected to be 4.7. Our market share right now is at 42.1%. We project to be at 43.6% next year. And our return on investment last year was 32%, and we hope to get to 34%. And so everybody claps and says, good job, team A, right? Then team B gets up and they say, we're not really sure what our product's called yet. And, we're not really even sure who the customer is. We didn't have any revenue last year, and we're not really sure what it's going to be in the future or if we're going to make any revenue next year. We don't have any market share, and we may or may not have market share in the future. And in terms of return on investment, we're actually negative right now because we're burning some money, and we haven't, had any revenue, so there's no return, but we think we're going to break even in the future. So my question to you is which team is going to get the funding? And you don't have to have, an MBA from Westcliff to know that it's going to be team A. Team B kind of looks silly, right? But team B is a startup team, meaning, they're a team that is operating under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And all they're doing is they're being honest about it. And that doesn't fly well, when you've got a management system that's set up to manage big existing lines of business. So that gets me into our definition, and actually the definition originally from the Lean Startup, the Blue Book from Eric Ries, which is a startup is a human institution, a team designed to deliver a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And it's the uncertainty that is the foundational, necessity of what a startup is. And so, the reason we work with large companies, traditionally defined startups, government agencies, is that all over the world at every organization, there are teams operating under conditions of extreme uncertainty. They're asking themselves questions like, I have a product idea, but I'm not sure it's really going to hit the mark with customers. Or I'm aware of a customer problem, but I'm not really sure how to solve it with a product or service. Or my favorite one, which we see all the time, which is our company has this goal, like, for example, we need to win in China. I've heard that one a lot, right? Or we need to get into blockchain, or we need to get into AI. Okay, great. But like, which customers? What problems are we solving? What products, right? And so all 3 of those, starting points have a lot of uncertainty. And so when there is uncertainty about what to build in the first place, if anything, that's when Lean Startup is most effective. And again, the startup organizations, the startup teams that we work with, some of them are Fortune 100 companies. Some of them are in Silicon Valley in a garage. Some of them are at government agencies, but they all have a lot of uncertainty about what they're trying to do in the first place. The other thing I'll just mention really quickly is it says a new product or service. Could be an entire business, could be a new feature, for a product or service. The unit of, how big the product or service can be all the way down to something really small, all the way up to an entire business, right? So basically this is how we define startups. And then the other question I get a lot, is what's the lean thing in lean startup? Like I've heard of lean manufacturing. I've heard of the Toyota production system. I kind of get that, but like that doesn't have anything to do with startups. So what gives, right? And our answer to that is there's really two stages of innovation, two stages of product development, two stages of lean, however you want to frame it in, what makes most sense for your situation. The little dotted line in the middle here is where we have a validated business plan. So back to that 100-page document with the hockey stick growth forecast at the end. We have that and we're confident in it. We actually have evidence. It's not something we made up. That's in the case of a startup, right? Or a growth and innovation team at an existing organization. Another common use case for a lean startup is product development. So the dotted line there is we have a product roadmap that's validated where we know if we build that thing, customers are going to love it, right? And so, that starting point is the starting point for what we call execute, meaning we've decided to do specifically this thing. Now, how do we marshal resources to go and do it? This is where most new product development processes live. There's a lot of process out there, a lot of techniques, a lot of things, right, in the execute stage. Where there's a gaping void is in the search stage. The search stage is where we're asking ourselves, what should we be building in the first place, if anything? And if we have a general sense, specifically, what should we be building? Like down to the requirements, right? The code, the specifics. How's it going to feel to the customer? What's the interface? And so these squiggles here are the squiggles of uncertainty. And going back to our definition of the startup teams live in the search stage. And so the more uncertain you are about who your customers are, what problems you're trying to solve, and basically, even questions like, is this product that we have in mind, is there real traction? Or are customers just telling us, they like it because they're nice people, right? And so the search stage is where startups live. And that's what lean startup is designed for, is the squiggles of uncertainty. So the fewer answers you have to some of those classic business questions, what's the ROI? What's the demand for this thing? How are we going to scale? How are we going to grow? What are our marketing and distribution channels? If you really don't have evidence for your answers for those things, you're farther to the left. You're in the search stage. So that's how we operate. So lean then is on the execute side. Once you know what creates value for customers, you can say, we're going to eliminate all activity that doesn't contribute to customer value. So Toyota production system, all this inventory that's stacking up on the side of the line of the manufacturing line, that doesn't create value for customers. Therefore it's waste. Get it out of here. Right. The question then is, what's lean to the left side? To the left side of that dotted line, what's lean mean? Because we don't know what creates value for customers yet. And the answer is validated learning. So finding out through evidence, not through guessing or through charisma or hubris, what creates value for customers. And that's really what lean startup is all about. In the end result of using lean startup in the search stage is a validated business plan if you're a startup, or if you're a growth and innovation team at a Fortune 100 company, or it's a validated product roadmap if you're in product development. And there's several other use cases that I won't go into, but that's what lean is in lean startup, is what's the minimum amount of time, energy, and effort that we can devote to finding out what customers value in the first place. It used to be we had to take 5 years to do that because we would submit the big document. We would get funding. We'd spend 3 years building it and $50 million and then find out nobody wanted it. We can find out that nobody wants it in a week now or in a day, by doing what we call an MVP, a minimum viable product, which is an early representation of the product that's designed for learning as opposed to exactly how it's going to look and feel for customers all the way down the line. So, we could go even farther into that philosophy, but again, I'm all about key takeaways, right? So number one, ask yourself if you're on a startup team right now. You might be, right? And by the way, if you're not on a startup team, you shouldn't be using Lean Startup. It's not a one size fits all. It's great at everything, right? So ask yourself, am I on a team that's a startup team where we're encountering a lot of uncertainty? If the answer is yes, that means you're in the search stage. And what's really dangerous is using traditional management systems that are designed for execute, to manage and to think about how to move forward with that search stage project. That creates a lot of waste, right? And so we'll find teams all the time that are, executing something and they say, yeah, we're using Lean. We're on time. We're on budget. We're hitting our specs, but they've leanly built something that nobody wants. I'm sure that's never happened to anyone in this room, right? But it's happened to every other client I've ever worked with. There's a lot of horror stories out there about we spent, 12 hours a day for 2 years building this thing. Felt like we were really busy, right? We felt good, felt like we were making progress, and then nobody wanted it. So, that's wasteful. That's a wasteful way of getting that learning loop. So rather than learning over 5 years and $50 million, how can we learn by tomorrow? How can we do it for $10 instead of $30 million? That's what Lean Startup is all about. So you should be using Lean Startup when you're in the search stage. And by the way, for those of you out there that are thinking, wait a minute, this sounds a little bit like StageGate. I'm either in one or the other. You can apply this. An entire business can be in the search stage or the execute stage. One product at an established business can be in the search stage versus execute. It can even apply at the feature level, right? So if you're like, hey, I've got this product we've been making for 125 years and everybody loves it, but I'm thinking about this new feature and I'm not really sure. That feature's in the search stage. So you can apply it at different levels of granularity. And again, it applies equally to traditionally defined startups as well as the way I defined a startup on the previous slide. The other thing that I'll mention here is companies and traditionally defined startups have this kind of innovation strategy over here on the left, where they're like, look, here's what we need to do. Again, we need to win in China, or we need to get into blockchain, or we need to get into AI. These are things we hear all the time, right? Which is great. Strategies are made to be very high level. Yeah, the issue then is, okay, there's an infinite number of ways that we could deliver on that strategic swim lane. But what should we do specifically? So if you tell a team, hey, we need to get into AI, and by the way, we've worked with a couple companies that have hired a bunch of AI people. Great. And then it's like, okay, well, what are they supposed to do? Right? What are we supposed to specifically build? Because execute, you need a roadmap. You need a business plan. You need something that says, go and do this. But the strategy is too high level to deliver on that. The search stage is the gap between those two things. So using Lean Startup to translate that strategy into what to execute is a big use case that we see all the time. And we help a lot of companies do that. So that's what Lean is. We've talked about what startups are. And the last thing I'll kind of touch on here, and Barry, again, if there's any questions, you can cut me off, is that Lean Startup is a system. This is something that is frequently overlooked. A lot of people think that you can just sprinkle, and by the way, this is the way it works at an established organization. If this was a startup, then we would have, and I think we might have some in the audience today, we might have some angel investors or VCs or other people that are funding startups at the top. Here, we've adapted this for how it feels inside an established organization, where executives at that organization are playing the role of angel investor or venture capitalist. And the thing is that you can't just train teams at an established organization how to use Lean Startup, because they're going to go off and run, build, measure, learn loops. They're going to say, what do we need to learn next? How could we test that most efficiently with an experiment? So for example, instead of waiting for 5 years and $30 million, what if we just came out with a brochure right now? Let's create the marketing material for the product that we're thinking about, and find out if anyone takes a call to action. Are they willing to call us? Are they willing to attend a meeting to learn more? Are they willing to sign up as a candidate for our pilot program? There's an infinite number of these calls to action. And you can get that learning today as opposed to waiting years from now, developing the same marketing material and then finding out that nobody wants it. So lean startup is all about hacking the cycle time on learning. If these teams run, build, measure, learn, they build MVPs, they go out and run experiments, and executives aren't expecting that, we're in big trouble. And so, at a lot of existing, established organizations, many of our clients, are over 50 years old, for example, as organizations. The executives have a role to play as well. They need to be expecting a pivot, persevere, kill recommendation from a team, and they need to be able to interpret that based on the evidence, the validated learning that the team has generated, and then make a decision on, am I going to allocate metered funding or not? Metered funding is a big part of lean startup. It's basically, it replicates the way that startup funding works out in the wild. Rather than entitlement funding, where somebody just walks in and says, hey, I have an idea, and you get $100 million. That doesn't happen, right? As our angel investor friends know. What happens is you come in and say, hey, I've got this idea. Here's some evidence that I'm on the right track. And you get a small tranche, right? You get the friends, family, and fools round. And then you get an angel round, and then you get, and it builds up. And the reason it builds up is you're providing more and more evidence that you're on the right track. So you're worth more. And so by running, build, measure, learn, and de-risking your startup, again, startup defined broadly, you're vetting and shaping your idea and de-risking it. And if you can come back to an executive or a venture capitalist and say, here's what we've learned and here's how we know, it's not hubris. We're not just giving you a shiny smile. We actually ran these experiments and we have this data. Then that gives executives or venture capitalists confidence to unlock another round of metered funding. And so lean startup is an entrepreneurial management system for vetting, shaping, and de-risking new opportunities as a whole. So that is how lean startup works. We've talked about what a startup is. We've talked about search versus execute. We've talked about lean, and we've kind of gone through the overall system diagram. So I've taken you through a lot. So I'm gonna stop here and maybe open it up for some questions.
That's great. Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate that. That's perfect. Ben Houston from Dropbox. He actually used the lean startup success.
Yes.
You want to talk about that, or you want me to mention it?
No, sure. I would say you can mention it. We also talked about Zappos, for example. But, I mean, there's a lot of and by the way, I always refer back to those classic examples because people are familiar with them, right?
Yeah.
And so we've got exactly. We've got a ton of examples, right, of how it works right now. Unfortunately, we're under NDA with a lot of our companies, and so every single day we're getting amazing wins. So I always like to talk about some of the classics that are more public now. But were you so basically, are you referring to the Dropbox video where they sent that out as an MVP? Yeah.
Well, there were file sharing companies before Dropbox. But Dropbox is unique because you can do multiple, you can do drag and drop, you can send them all out. So it was different. But before Ben Houston wrote one line of code, all he did was create a video of a mock-up of what this thing was going to be. And overnight, he went from 5,000 sign-ons to 75,000. Took him nothing, just a video.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And Zappos is another one. Nobody thought anybody would buy shoes online. And so what he did was he went to retailers, other places, not his own inventory, but other retailers, took pictures of those shoes and created a web page where he actually put those pictures on that web page. He didn't own them. It was somebody else's. And when somebody clicked to buy them, he went back to the retailer, paid full retail for it, and then shipped them out to these people to prove that this is a business. It's incredible.
Yeah. And so, in the case of Dropbox, we'd call that a marketing MVP, right? Before you build anything. And by the way, a lot of people think lean startup just works with software. I helped build Caterpillar's lean innovation program. So we're talking bulldozers, we're talking excavators, dump trucks, not software. We did a lot of software as well, right? but it's like nobody goes out and kicks the tire or kicks the tracks of a bulldozer. They look at the marketing material, right? Or show an explainer video, or, I mean, there's an infinite number of options of MVPs that you can use depending on what you want to test, right? So it's not just any MVP. It's what do we need to learn next? And then you can design an MVP. In a lot of cases, you can design an instrument that is not an MVP that gives you the learning you need. But the point is that why would Zappos, do something like that, right? It's crazy. They take pictures and put them up and then go and pay full retail. That's not scalable. Well, of course it's not. That's because that's not the point. The point was he could then go back and give data to his investors and say, look at this. I know it seems like a long shot that I'm going to sell shoes online, but here's all the data I have that shows people are willing to buy shoes online. Not only that, in running that experiment, he learned about the importance of service, right? That wouldn't have happened had he just had a business plan where he made a bunch of assumptions. And so in the process, that's why we say vetting, shaping, and de-risking. So no product, no business, no feature that goes in the front end of Lean Startup ever comes out exactly the same way, because you're learning. That's the whole point. So in doing that experiment, he realized, boy, I'm really going to have to focus on service. We're going to have to focus on efficient shipping and delivery and delighting customers in the service area. And none of that would have happened if he would have spent all of his time sitting at home writing a big business plan, because he was out getting evidence in real time.
Does the Lean Startup pertain to companies that do not apply to unique, innovative ideas? Like, for instance, the cosmetic industry, making skincare products, for instance, similar to moisturizers. We know people buy these items, so how can we use the Lean Startup to understand our market better for something like that?
Yeah, it's great. So I'll go back to the definition that I showed. It was of a startup, right? It's a human institution designed to deliver a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And it doesn't say anything in there about how innovative it needs to be. And so the reason it doesn't is there's a lot of things that are not necessarily quote unquote innovative. And by the way, I don't even like that term, because what does that mean, right? It should be about solving customer problems, not if it's innovative or not. But the reason it doesn't say that is because it just has to do with uncertainty. So again, working with companies that are 150 years old, who are like, hey, should we introduce this new line of cosmetics, or should we introduce a new dump truck or a new whatever? There's a lot of uncertainty about that, even though it's just another, mascara or whatever. And so, we talk about this a lot, with our clients. We're in the business of solving customer problems and guiding, clients to solve customer problems. And, I have a silly example that I like to give because it sticks. And that is, if you've got a customer problem that you can solve through two different means. One is by hiring a guy named Bob, right? That's the solution. And then the second idea is a 3D printing drone that's powered by artificial intelligence and blockchain. Which one should you pick, right? And the answer is whichever one solves the problem the best. And so let's not use technology for technology's sake. If hiring Bob is a better return on investment and is gonna solve the problem, then that, for me, that's innovation, even though it doesn't have all the fancy technology names. So the answer is yes. All that matters is uncertainty. What type of uncertainty? Not sure who our customers are, not sure there's a valid problem to solve, not sure our product or service has traction, not sure we can grow beyond some nerdy early adopters, which is a lot of what Dropbox was trying to do. They had some, fellow geeks that really liked their thing, but they're like, is there a way we can scale this to mainstream? We don't know. And then also, is this worth scaling? So for big companies, does this hit our hurdle rates, right? Versus other investments and that kind of thing. But you're doing it with evidence as opposed to, basically making up the numbers.
Got it. Organizational psychologist Adam Grant stated that 85% of the workforce don't voice new ideas in fear of being ridiculed. Have you experienced this early in your career, and how do you overcome this so that companies can take advantage of creativity and innovation in the area of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that's great. So again, big Adam Grant fan, and I trust his data, right? Sounds right to me. What I would say is we find in a lot of cases, organizations are saying, we need to innovate, and there's big posters about innovation and bumper stickers. But the way that innovation is managed is the traditional way. So I guess, coming back to this thing, right? They'll be like, we need to innovate. And then basically they're asking for ideas, and what they're asking for is dotted lines and things, because nobody knows the search stage exists and they don't want to talk about the search stage. So they're saying, okay, great. You have an idea, for this new widget here. Great. Like, what's the return on investment for that? And you're like, I don't know. I just gave you an idea. How am I supposed to know what the return on investment is for this thing? I don't even know who the customer is. And so then it dies. And so that happens enough. And then people just know, yeah, they're really not interested, because all I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the meat grinder of that dotted line there, where I have to have a business plan. And this is using traditional management techniques that are built for execute is not only wasteful, because the first time you get any evidence about whether customers are going to adopt your solution or not is way at the end after you've blown all your time and money. It's also immoral. And that's a big word to use, right? And the reason it's immoral is back to the Acme Corp thing. You have two options if you're a search stage team at an existing organization. The first thing you can do is be honest. That's what Team B did in the exercise that I took everyone through, right? And they said, we don't know what revenue is going to be. We don't know what our product's called. We don't know what our market share is going to be. Because they're being honest, they don't. They're in the search stage. Well, what happens then? You get laughed out of the office, right? You look like you didn't do your homework, even though you're being honest. And most companies in their values talk about integrity. So that's the first option. That's no good, right? The second option, which happens more often than we'd like to think, is that startup team puts a spreadsheet together. And then there's another tab in the spreadsheet and another tab and more charts and more graphs and more tables. And they've been staring at it for so long that they think it's true. They haven't done any research. They haven't done any build, measure, learn, no experimentation. So I wouldn't necessarily say that they're making the numbers up, even though they are. It doesn't feel that way to the team, but they know that in order to get anything funded, like this widget that we talked about, you got to put some numbers together, because that's the only way to do anything. And then, that's not good either, because God forbid that's selected for investment, right? And then you're basically, as a company, you've funded a house of cards. So the issue is, okay, neither one of them, so both of those are immoral. You're either, subjecting your company to unnecessary risk because people are making up numbers to get things funded, or you're laughing at people and, kind of calling them foolish for being honest because they're in the search stage. That's why I'm using the word immoral. The third path is, okay, you're in the search stage. You're allowed to be in the search stage, right? Thank you for being honest. Now, here are the tools that we have. It's called Lean Startup, right? What's your biggest assumption right now? That if it was false, would really undermine your entire business idea. And then how do we set up an experiment to get evidence on that in the next 4 days? Really light. It doesn't have to be statistically significant. And then let's learn from that. And then let's do the next thing. What's the next thing you need to learn? And so it's giving people permission to say they don't know and giving them some tools to work and maybe get out of search into execute. Or in the case of a kill recommendation, it's when it seems like, hey, I had an idea for this widget. We proved we shouldn't do this. And we spent 3 weeks and $2,000 doing it. And for a big company, that's a great investment, right? Here's what we shouldn't do, is a great thing to learn for that amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. In terms of the build, measure, learn, paradigm.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that you escape the constant build trap? Is that part of the pivot process?
Yeah. The real question that'll bake your noodle is, what are we building? Mm-hmm. And the answer isn't necessarily the product. So in build, measure, learn, what we're building is the best experiment, that would help us learn what we need to learn next. It doesn't have to be the product. And so in a lot of cases, it's maybe going out and doing some interviews. Maybe it's setting up a behavioral exercise where we put people in a situation. They don't know we're watching them, but we are. And we're trying to decide, we're trying to observe how they behave. That's an experiment we can build. It's not the product, right? And then also, the types of MVPs that are available. By the way, there's all this stuff about MMP and MLP, and everybody's got it like whatever. It's all the same thing. It's an early version of what you're building that'll help you determine if you're on the right path or not, right? And so, basically a sketch MVP is something we use a lot, where we literally say, go to your printer, take out an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and draw your idea. I'm talking stick figures here, people, right? Like whatever it is, make it really basic, and then go out and talk to customers about that. We've had sketch MVPs before where after an hour and a half of showing that to a customer and asking a structured set of questions, we're like, look, we gotta go. Like, we'll schedule more time, but we got other things we gotta do here, and we have to stop the customer from giving us all this input and feedback, right? And so it's not necessarily building the product with code. It's building an experiment or even a marketing MVP, a sketch MVP, whatever you want to call it, to learn what you need to learn next. And so doing that before you start building the actual product, especially in high capital industries, right, where it takes a lot of time. We're talking jet engines and that kind of stuff. Making sure you're building the right thing to learn what you need to learn next, and not necessarily the product. Could be the product.
Right.
Yeah.
There's two questions that are related here.
Yeah.
Having started several companies from scratch, I know that job descriptions are kind of meaningless.
Yeah.
But the question is, how important is human capital, and what kind of teams would you hire for a lean startup situation?
Okay. So I think there's two angles there. The first one is cross-functional. So back to the original definition from Eric's book. It's a human institution. It's a team. It's not one person who is omniscient and has every skill imaginable. And so, cross-functional, diverse, lots of different perspectives. For example, in a lot of cases, we'll coach, especially at big companies, have somebody from the finance department be an SME, have your product person, have an engineer, have a UX designer. But we try to make that as small as possible in the beginning. Really important for those of you out there that are practicing this stuff. Big teams, especially in the beginning, don't work well. They're inefficient. And also, when you have that many people, remember that pivot or kill is an option in Lean Startup. It's pivot, persevere, or kill is the result of these continuous build, measure, learn loops. And if you start out with a team of 40, it's really likely that you're going to, after 4 weeks, say, hey, sorry, we wasted your time. We're going to make a kill recommendation. Thanks for playing, right? And so starting with a small cross-functional team, and then as you make your way from search into execute, if you do, adding team members really selectively who have the kind of skill sets and capabilities that you need. So that's one. The second way that maybe the question was intended is we find all the time where people are like, yeah, we'd love to use Lean Startup, but we just don't have innovative people here, right? We just don't have the right people. And our view is that that's wrong, right? Humans are naturally innovative. It's the environment in which we're put that kind of makes us put on a suit of armor and not be innovative anymore. And so we've worked with some of the crustiest, most skeptical, from the outside, least innovative people you could imagine. And once they are given permission that the search stage exists and that it's okay to not know, but also that there's a structured system for moving from search into execute, they become innovation rock stars. And so, two ways of coming at that question. and avoid the temptation of saying, yeah, we just have the wrong people, so we can't do this. That's rarely the case, in our view.
Very good.
Yeah.
Next question has to do, I think, with Eric Reese was talking about in terms of build engines. After you validate your idea with consumers and you have data to back up the market need and acceptance, based on your experience, what would you suggest would be the steps to scale the business?
Right. So I think in the original works, he talked a lot about the value hypothesis and the growth hypothesis. And for some reason, and again, I like when you read articles on Lean Startup, especially ones that are critical of Lean Startup, you're like, did anyone actually read the book that's criticized? Like, where did it say go ask customers what they want and do that? It didn't say that anywhere. And like, he actually says don't do that on like page 6 or whatever, but don't get me started. So where I was redirecting myself here, there's the value hypothesis, which is what everybody seems to glom onto, which is, can we show traction with customers where this is a must-have product for some customer segment, right? But he talks just as much about the growth hypothesis, which is, okay, now that we've got some early adopters, how are we going to get this, or how are we going to cross the chasm? What's our marketing distribution go-to-market model for going beyond the early adopters who actually love this thing, right? And so that's a big part of Lean Startup. I would say the general order of operations that we would recommend is customer hypothesis up front. Do we really know that there's a valid problem to be solved here? Or are we just kind of like geeking out on technology and there's not an application? The second one is the value hypothesis. Is this a must-have product for some customer segment? Then there's the growth hypothesis. Again, this is an order of operations you can apply to any startup. The growth hypothesis has to come after value because and actually the Hacking Growth book, which I think I have around here somewhere. I think Sean Ellis wrote that one, but it's an entire book about the growth hypothesis, right? It's once you know it's must have for someone, how do you grow and scale? And then the scale hypothesis of, okay, now that we've got the entire business model, put together, is this really something that's going to make the profitability that we think it can? So kind of backing up from your question, that's the order of operations that we would recommend. And a lot of people kind of stop at value hypothesis when it's like, no, you're halfway through. You can run experiments on how to go to market. As a matter of fact, just last week, I was in a workshop with a client, where they were doing just that. They're like, okay, we know this is a must have for customers, but we can't, like, our traditional go to market strategy isn't working. Like, there's something that's just, it doesn't work for this product. So what's another, go to market model idea that we have? And they're going to run experiments on that. And so you can use it for growth and scale as well as kind of, customer and value up front.
Very good.
Yeah.
The whole Lean Startup framework resonated with me because I entered my entrepreneurial career not knowing a lot about business, but I was a scientist and I used a scientific method, which is basically build, measure, and learn. And I've been doing a workshop here. We have something called Engage, and I've been doing a 2-hour workshop for a lot of these students here on the Lean Startup framework. But have you worked with any other educational institutions?
Not much. I'd say most of our work right now is with kind of startups as traditionally defined, and then like, innovation and growth executives, right? Who've got a growth target like, we need to generate $1 billion in net new revenue by 2030. Or another use case is product development executives who are saying, hey, I want to help upskill my product development people. I'd like to get them into the habit of experimenting with concepts before we just kind of decide what to build and go build it and then find out nobody wants it. So haven't done a lot of work with universities. I know there's interest there. We just haven't found a way to engage yet.
Well, actually you have, because Westcliff is already there.
No, sorry. I always like to make a differentiation between Lean Startup, which you're certainly engaging with, and then Lean Startup Co., right? Which is the business in terms of how that company could assist. But yeah, absolutely. And by the way, congratulations on being a university that's teaching lean startup, because oddly, it's taught at kind of like Ivy League schools and then like nowhere else. I don't know why. It's perplexing. It's bewildering, but seriously, it's impressive.
Thank you. We know we've got a lot of foreign students, and one of them is asking whether lean startup can apply to the public sector for economic development of a continent, of a country.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, so it can. The reason I'm like, is that's a big passion of mine. I think there's a lot of good work to be done there. And basically in terms of, startup and private sector support, I think the answer is yes, right? There's a few examples of that out there. I don't know, and I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole because I'm not sure what public sector means or what economic development means. So maybe if the person could either come off of mute or type something into chat so we could see a little bit more. Maybe is there a specific application or use case that you have in mind? Let's see if I can open the chat.
Yeah, they didn't mention.
Okay. So the answer is yes. And coming back to what are the applications of Lean Startup? It's whenever we're uncertain, we've got a problem to be solved and we're uncertain about how to solve it. The issue with societal problems is that somehow has to translate into a personal problem, right? So as an example, if our societal problem is that rural farmers in Illinois aren't getting enough vaccines, okay, that's a problem, I guess. But like, when you talk to the rural farmers in Illinois, do they think they have that problem or not? Right. And so, there's a lot of, you have to, especially when you're in the public sector, with public policy and things like that, you really have to be careful with how you frame the problem to be solved before you kind of gallop off and start designing experiments.
This is a good one, that people generally face in startup companies. Comes from Dr. Johnson. One of the common problems with companies is that those who were invaluable when they were starting a company, that is, people who wear many hats but are not experts in any particular area, not usually have the expertise as they grow and have to be replaced with people who are experts in their area. This is a huge problem as companies expand from the entrepreneurial stage to a more functional model. How does a company monitor this, and how does it make sure it does not become blind to the potential huge company killing problem?
So it's a great question. And what I would say is, companies should have an entrepreneurship track, just like they have an accounting track, or an engineering track, or finance, whatever it is, right? And so you don't want to lose those people because those are the people that got you there in the first place. And so, good companies are the ones that say, look, there's just a certain type of person who's got a certain type of mindset and skill set that's good at working in the squiggles, right? I suffered long and hard working in jobs that were in execute myself, where it's like you come in, read the list, you gotta pull this lever every once in a while, and then you push this button on Wednesday, and it's like, ugh. It's like gut wrenching, right? I've chosen a career in the squiggles, right? We actually call it the innovation tribe, and you know them when you see them, right? We know each other when we see each other. We're willing to sacrifice, the sense of security and the blanket of protection for a little bit of excitement, right? And that excitement can sometimes come across as stress. But it's worth it, right? The highs and the lows. And so, it's a problem, right? Responding directly to your question. Yes, we see that a lot, but also a lot of companies will have people that they retain specifically because they have a portfolio or a pipeline of innovation. And that's the right place to put somebody like that. It's that entrepreneurship, that innovation division, where that person is most useful. And trying to put them in execute, it's not going to work.
Yeah. A friend of mine, Pat Hull, back in 1999, he was in a bar and he heard some truckers talking about a long haul that they had to make and their trucks weren't fully loaded. And it just sparked on him. Maybe I should make a web page where I can put these truckers together with people who actually need stuff shipped. And he started a company called Get Loaded, and ultimately sold that for like $50 million. The question from another person is, what are the risks involved in approaching a market early, just like Pat did? How do you manage consumer expectations if you promote a product service before you are ready to provide it? That would be the Wizard of Oz technique, right?
Sure.
Also, how do you protect your brand and credibility in that scenario?
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot there. Keep me honest on if I'm actually responding to the question. I don't want to be a politician where I'm asked one thing and I respond to something else. The first answer is all about desirability, feasibility, and viability. So desirability is, do people want this thing, right? And you can use Wizard of Oz, smoke and mirrors, marketing brochures, right, to find out if people want this thing or not. And you can even simulate the experience. So sometimes you'll hear concierge and Wizard of Oz experiments. Those are two great examples of where you're actually simulating to the customer what it feels like to consume the product, even though it doesn't exist yet. And so a concierge is where you're doing a manual version and the customer knows that you're doing a manual or an analog version of what might be digitized or systematized later. And then a Wizard of Oz is where the customer has no idea. You're behind the curtain, which is why it's called Wizard of Oz, and you're simulating the experience, but in reality, it's a bunch of people running around behind the curtain simulating the experience. And so, all of those are great ways of testing desirability. The other two factors are feasibility, meaning can we actually build this thing? And then viability, which is should we build it? Is it gonna be as profitable as we need it to be? And so I guess the answer is that you need to be thinking about all of those all at once, all the time. But in the early stages, when you're farther to the left in the search stage, when you're more full on squiggles, you should be thinking more about desirability. Not entirely, right? But share of mind should be about desirability. Feasibility, yes. If it's like, okay, this requires a jet propelled flying car. Okay, maybe we should think about feasibility a little bit more, right? But generally speaking, in today's world, if you're testing desirability, you're pretty sure that it can be built at a desktop feasibility level, right? And what we find all the time is that feasibility work is more comfortable for teams, especially engineers and scientists and, people with really good technical degrees, for example. And so they underinvest in desirability up front and they overinvest in feasibility. And the fact is there's a feedback loop between those three. So in testing desirability, the requirements change because you find out of the 5 features that you thought needed to be feasible, only one needs to be feasible. And there's another one that wasn't even in the original feature set that is a must-have that we didn't even think about, but we learned it because we tested it with the marketing MVP, for example. And so desirability experiments inform what needs to be feasible and what's viable. And so there's kind of 3-way interaction between all those things. But what I would say is most teams these days are like, yeah, we know this can be built generally. Our advice is don't overinvest in feasibility. Go out, find out what's desirable. Don't make any promises. You don't have to trick anyone, right? And then you can come back and do the feasibility work. And then if you can't, if you find out it's not technically feasible, you can say, sorry, we're not going to build this. The second one was, can you remind me, Barry?
Credibility. How do you
credibility. Yeah, it's a great question. So, there's nothing that says if you're a Fortune 100 company, there's nothing that says, if you run an experiment that you have to put your brand name on it. Where's that written? Right?
Exactly.
I've never seen that before. And so, we have companies all the time that run experiments where, it's just a different brand. We run experiments for Fortune 100 companies as Lean Startup Co. because we're willing to do that with our brand. And there's other companies that are willing to do that with their brand, right? And so, you don't have to sacrifice your credibility. Not only that, especially if you're an engineer where you really value quality, engineers are really not skeptical, that's the wrong word. They're nervous about doing like a sketch MVP, right? Where it's like, look, we just drew this with pencil and paper and we're going to show it to someone. And it's like, oh, that's really unprofessional. And the answer is no, it's not. When you come to someone who's a customer and say, look, usually we just design these really shiny things and then we come to you for quote unquote feedback, but it's too late to use your feedback because we've already sunk all of our time and money. So you're getting it anyway, right? That's not, empathetic for the customer. Far better to say, look, here's our idea. And before we spend a lot of time and money building this thing, we wanted to get your feedback. And we're here to listen to you. As you can see, if you don't like it, you're not going to hurt our feelings because it's just on pencil and paper. So you can be rest assured you're not going to hurt my feelings if you give me honest feedback. In 100% of the cases that I've seen, customers love that. Not once has a customer said, that's really unprofessional. I can't believe you came to me with a pencil and paper prototype. So, knowing what quality is and everything like that, and is our brand at risk? There's a lot of ways of circumventing that. And then also for a lot of the MVPs that you run, it's welcomed by the customers. The customers love it because you're actually listening to them.
That's great. I'm going to surprise you with this question because I didn't prepare you for it. With our speakers, we usually try to end with 3 takeaways.
Yeah.
Could you give our 3 takeaways?
Sure. Okay. So number 1 is, and just for the record, I wasn't prepared for any of those questions. So it's level playing field. But I would say the first one is know that the search stage exists. And it's okay. Like, to say, I don't know is sometimes very liberating, right? So if you're like, yeah, I don't know if we should build this or not, just be honest with yourself, have integrity, and say, yeah, I don't know, but there's a way of getting out of it. And that is stating, using build, measure, learn. And we haven't gone super deep into build, measure, learn, but you can Google it, right? It's all out there. So that's one. There is a search stage, and it's okay. The other thing is that I would say is that, Lean Startup is a system. And so if you're excited about Lean Startup and you're like, wow, I got to use this, make sure that you've got somebody that, is on board with you using it. So if you're an executive at a big company and you're like, this is great, make sure that you're clear with teams on what it is they're supposed to be doing, because it takes a system. It's not just, that's why we don't offer Lean Startup Practitioner certification, because you can't practice Lean Startup as an individual. It's impossible. You have to be a system, right? So that's one. And then the other thing I would say is, prioritize what you need to learn. Back to build, measure, learn. Learn the next thing that could sink your entire startup. State that and avoid the temptation of testing a lot of other things that you're right about just to be right. So what is that big lunker? We call it the leap of faith assumption, the LOFA, that could really sink your business. Test that next. Have the courage to do that, and then run the experiment, collect the results, and then say, what do we need to learn after that? So those would be my 3 key takeaways.
Very good. So how can people connect with you? Ben? On LinkedIn, for one?
Yeah, LinkedIn is good. It's Ben, and then HAF as in Frank, ELE. Lots of ways to mess up that last name. And then also I'm at ben.hafele@leanstartup.co. Please don't put an M at the end. It doesn't get to me. So it's leanstartup.co.co. And, thanks for having me.
I'll put that in the recording. So, Ben, let me, I really appreciate you being here and thank Eric as well.
Yeah.
This is really, we really appreciate your time. I just want to let the audience know who's coming up. Our next speaker is Bered Kogan. May is Mental Health Month, so we brought in an internationally known motivational speaker, Bered Kogan, founder and CEO of the Momentum Institute. Bered Kogan is a noted mindset and resilience expert with expertise in helping individuals and teams release the mental and emotional obstacles that prevent them from adapting effectively to change. So this is a good follow-up to Lean Startup framework, which is all about change, isn't it? Again, Ben, really appreciate you being here, and I want to thank everybody please pick up this book, and you can get it on Amazon. It's a great book. You won't be sorry. Again, Ben, been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And there's a lot of good questions we didn't get to. I'd be happy to answer those. So if somebody could copy those, I'd be happy to get back on all of these.
Very good. Great. Thank you very much.